The stars had always been a source of wonder for the coalition of worlds, but now they burned with the cold light of desperation. General Cale Reeves stood on the command deck of the Sovereign's Dawn, watching through the reinforced viewports as another evacuation fleet limped toward the edge of the system. The Void Eaters had claimed another world, 3 billion souls reduced to cosmic dust in a matter of hours. General, the refugee ships are requesting immediate docking clearance. Commander Tal's voice carried the weight of exhaustion that had become all too familiar. Their life support systems are failing. Reeve nodded grimly. Grant them priority access to docking bays 7 through 12. And Commander, make sure the medical teams are ready. We both know what we'll find aboard those ships. The Coalition had once been a beacon of order and prosperity across the galaxy. 700 worlds bound together by trade diplomacy and the shared dream of peaceful coexistence among the stars. Now, barely 40 worlds remained huddled together like frightened animals as an incomprehensible enemy consumed everything in its path. The Void Eaters defied all understanding. They appeared without warning, tearing holes in space-time itself, and devoured entire star systems as if they were nothing more than appetizers at a cosmic banquet. Traditional weapons passed through them harmlessly. Ships, stations, even entire planets simply ceased to exist where the Void Eaters touched them. Sir, we have the preliminary analysis from Xerion Prime. Lieutenant Commander Vex approached with a datapad, her usually steady hands trembling slightly. The consumption pattern is identical to the others. Complete a molecular disintegration within a 3-parsec radius. Reeve took the report, though he already knew what it would say. Every world fell the same way. First, reality would begin to shimmer and bend. Then the Void Eaters would emerge formless shadows that consumed light matter and even the fabric of space itself. No warning, no pattern that could be predicted, no strategy that could counter them. How many Coalition ships were lost? Reeve asked, though he dreaded the answer. 2/3 of the Xerion defense fleet, Vex replied quietly. Admiral Corrin chose to go down with his flagship rather than retreat. Another old friend gone. Another decorated officer who had believed, as they all had, that discipline and tactical superiority could overcome any threat. How naive they had been. General Commander Tal moved closer, lowering his voice. The High Council is requesting your presence for an emergency session. They're discussing the quarantine protocols. Reeve felt his blood run cold. The quarantine protocols. For over 3 centuries, the Coalition had maintained strict isolation policies regarding certain sectors of the galaxy, particularly Sector 7, where humanity had been contained after their last contact with the Coalition had ended in catastrophe. Humans. The word itself carried weight in Coalition space, spoken in whispers, and accompanied by warnings passed down through generations. The species that had turned themselves into living weapons. The ones who had willingly abandoned their biological heritage in favor of technological and genetic modification that defied every ethical principle the Coalition held sacred. Tell the Council I'll be there in 10 minutes, Reeve said, handing the datapad back to Vex. As Tal departed, Reeve remained at the viewport, staring out at the refugee ships. Each one carried survivors who had witnessed the impossible, who had seen entire worlds simply stop existing. The council chambers on Sovereign's Dawn had been designed to accommodate representatives from dozens of species, but now only a handful of beings occupied the vast circular space. Chancellor Morden of the Zalari presided from the central dais, her 4 arms gesticulating as she spoke in urgent tones with the remaining council members. General Reeve, she acknowledged his arrival with a nod that carried grim determination. We've been reviewing the classified archives. The reports from Xerion Prime confirm our worst fears. The Void Eaters are accelerating their consumption rate. How long do we have? Reeve asked, taking his seat at the Strategic Council. Dr. Halen, the Coalition's foremost xenobiologist, activated a holographic display showing the galaxy with red zones indicating consumed systems. At their current rate of expansion, we estimate 6 months before they reach the core worlds. Perhaps 8 if we can establish effective evacuation protocols. 8 months to evacuate 40 billion souls. Council member Tyros muttered, his scaled face reflecting the hopelessness they all felt. It's impossible. Which brings us to the matter at hand, Chancellor Morden said, her tone becoming even more grave. The archives contain references to species classification 7 Alpha. The humans. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Even among the Coalition's most experienced leaders, the mention of humanity carried a weight that few fully understood. The official records spoke of first contact, failed diplomacy, and the establishment of quarantine zones. The unofficial stories whispered of horrors that defied comprehension. Chancellor, Commander Tal interjected, "Surely you're not suggesting we lift the quarantine. The humans were isolated for good reason. Their modifications pose a threat to natural evolution throughout the galaxy." Dr. Halen leaned forward. The sealed archives indicate that humanity developed countermeasures against extinction-level events through biological and technological integration. If anyone has faced something like the Void Eaters before, they haven't just faced extinction. Another council member, engineer analyst Kep, interrupted. According to the deep archives, they've redefined it. The last official report described them as having abandoned the concept of individual mortality entirely. Reeves studied the holographic display, watching the red zones pulse like infected wounds across the galaxy. Everything rational in his mind screamed against what they were considering. But then he thought of Zirion Prime, of Admiral Corrin's final transmission, of the 3 billion lives snuffed out like candles in a cosmic wind. "What exactly are we discussing here?" he asked quietly. Chancellor Morden met his gaze. Breaking quarantine, making contact with the humans, asking them for help. "They'll refuse," Tal said immediately. "Even if we could reach them, why would they help us? We treated them as pariahs, locked them away because their evolution frightened us." "Because," Dr. Halen said, pulling up another display, showing energy readings from the edge of human space. "They're still evolving, and our analysis suggests they view the Coalition as part of their greater ecosystem. If we fall, the ripple effects could reach them eventually." Reeve felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a physical force. Every instinct told him this was madness. The humans had been quarantined not just for their modifications, but for their philosophy. They had willingly traded their humanity for survival, becoming something that challenged the very definition of life itself. But what choice did they have? "I'll need a volunteer crew," he said finally. "A ship fast enough to reach Sector 7 and advanced enough to survive whatever we find there." General Tal stepped forward, his expression grave. "I must protest this course of action. The humans represent an unknown variable. We could be inviting something worse than the Void Eaters into Coalition space." "Commander, look around." Reeve gestured to the mostly empty chamber. "In 6 months, there won't be a Coalition left to protect. We're facing extinction. At this point, any option is worth exploring." 3 days later, Reeve stood on the bridge of the Endeavour, a Pathfinder-class vessel, equipped with the Coalition's most advanced long-range communication and sensor technology. His hand-picked crew of 25 represented the best the Coalition had to offer, specialists from across the remaining worlds who had volunteered for what many considered a suicide mission. "Final systems check complete," General reported Chief Navigator Zara Voss, a brilliant young officer whose grandmother had been one of the last diplomatic envoys to human space. "All green across the board." "Helm set course for the quarantine boundary," Reeve commanded. "Maximum sustainable velocity." The journey to Sector 7 would take 4 days at their current speed. 4 days to prepare for contact with a species that had chosen evolution over biology, adaptation over preservation, survival over everything that made life recognizable. As the stars streaked past the viewports, Reeve found himself reading the sealed files on humanity's last known activities. the reports painted a picture that defied easy comprehension. Humans who could survive in hard vacuum, who shared consciousness across light years, who treated death as merely another form of transformation. General. Navigation Officer Iron looked up from his console. We're receiving a transmission. It's coming from inside the quarantine zone. On screen. The main view screen flickered to life, showing static that slowly resolved into a human face. At least Reeve thought it was human. The being's features were perfectly symmetrical, almost artificial in their precision. Their eyes held depths that seemed to reflect infinity, and when they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple vocal cords. Coalition Vessel Endeavor. The being said, I am Interface Designation Mara Voss. We have been monitoring your approach. How did you know our ship designation? Reeve asked, stepping forward. And how are you transmitting through our quantum encryption? Mara's expression remained neutral, though something that might have been amusement flickered across their features. Your encryption relies on mathematical principles we incorporated into our basic neural architecture approximately 200 years ago. As for your ship's designation, we have maintained observation protocols for all Coalition activity near the quarantine boundary. You're watching us. We observe all potential variables in our local spacetime, Mara replied. General Cale Reeve, commanding officer of Coalition forces, carrying authorization codes for diplomatic contact under Crisis Protocol Omega. You seek our assistance against the entities you designate as Void Eaters. Reeve felt a chill run down his spine. How could you possibly know that? Because we have encountered them before. The bridge fell silent. Even through the transmission, the weight of those words was unmistakable. The humans had faced the Void Eaters and survived. Request permission to enter the quarantine zone for formal contact, Reeve said, forcing his voice to remain steady. Permission granted. Transmitting navigation coordinates. General Reeve, I should warn you that the space within our territory may be disorienting to unmodified consciousness. We will provide you with adaptation protocols upon arrival. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge crew staring at each other in stunned silence. Well, Chief Navigator Voss said quietly, that was unexpected. Set course for the transmitted coordinates, Reeve ordered, and prepare the crew for I'm not sure what. The boundary of human space was marked not by energy barriers or warning buoys, but by something far more profound. As the Endeavor crossed into Sector 7, reality itself seemed to shift. The stars looked different, their light refracted through space that felt somehow denser, more alive. General, our sensors are detecting massive quantum fluctuations, reported Science Officer Delian, her voice tight with concentration. It's as if space itself has been modified. Through the viewports, they could see structures that defied classification. Were they ship space stations, or something else entirely? They moved with organic fluidity, reshaping themselves as the Endeavor approached. Incoming transmission, Communications Officer Zix announced. Mara Voss appeared on screen again, but this time Reeve could see more of their environment. Behind them stretched a space that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent patterns, and Reeve could swear he saw other figures moving in the background, beings whose forms shifted and flowed like liquid mercury. Welcome to the new Sol system, General Reeve, Mara said. Please maintain your current course. We will guide you to a suitable docking facility. The new Sol system, Reeve asked. What was once called Earth and its surrounding space, Mara explained. We have expanded its capabilities considerably since our isolation began. As they drew closer, the scale of human transformation became clear. What had once been Earth was now something unrecognizable. The planet's surface writhed with biomechanical growth structures that were part building, part organism, part machine. Orbital platforms surrounded it like a crown of metallic coral, and ships moved between them with the grace of swimming creatures. My God, Chief Navigator Voss whispered. What have they done? Evolution, Reeve said quietly, remembering the words from the sealed files. They've taken evolution into their own hands. The docking process was unlike anything in coalition protocols. Instead of mechanical coupling, the Endeavour was guided into what appeared to be a living hangar bay. Walls of some unknown material pulsed around them, sealing them in with movements that resembled breathing. General Science Officer Delian's voice was strained. Our atmospheric readings. The air in the docking bay isn't just breathable. It's being actively adjusted to match our biological requirements. Whatever's surrounding us is analyzing our exhalations and modifying itself accordingly. Preparation for disembarkation took on an entirely new dimension when Interface Mara Voss contacted them again. General Reeve, before you board our facility, we must provide you with modification protocols. Unaltered biological consciousness cannot effectively interface with our environment. What kind of modifications? Reeve asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Temporary neural bridging and sensory enhancement. Nothing permanent for your visit, though you should be aware that prolonged exposure to our space tends to leave, impressions on biological nervous systems. Commander Tal stepped forward. General, this is exactly what the quarantine was established to prevent. They're talking about modifying our minds. Without the modifications, Mara continued, you will experience severe disorientation, possibly madness, as your brains attempt to process sensory input they were never designed to handle. Reeve found himself facing another impossible choice. Risk his crew's sanity and potentially their lives, or undergo modifications that could fundamentally change who they were. But then he thought of the Void Eaters of the 40 worlds, depending on him to find a solution. What do the modifications entail? Injection of nanoscale neural enhancers that will integrate temporarily with your nervous systems. They will allow you to perceive and interact with our environment without permanent alteration to your base biology. The process takes approximately 30 minutes and will wear off within one standard galactic cycle after you leave our space. After a hurried conference with his senior staff, Reeve made the decision. They would accept the modifications. Dr. Yamin, their chief medical officer, insisted on being the first to undergo the procedure to monitor its effects before allowing the rest of the crew to be modified. The modification chamber was biological in nature, its walls pulsing with veins of light that seemed to respond to their presence. Mara Voss was waiting for them, but in person, they were even more unsettling than on the view screen. Their bodies seemed to shift and flow, as if their very matter was negotiable. Dr. Yamin. Mara addressed their medic directly. Please place your hand on the adaptation matrix. A section of the wall extruded outward, forming a hand-shaped depression that glowed with soft bioluminescence. Yamin looked to Reeve, who nodded encouragingly, then pressed her palm against the surface. What happened next defied description. Tendrils of light flowed from the matrix into Yamin's hand, and she gasped as her eyes widened. For a moment, her entire form seemed to shimmer as if she were being seen through water. Extraordinary, Ma. She breathed, her voice carrying new harmonics. I can see everything is connected. The walls, the air, even the light itself. It's all part of a greater organism. How do you feel? Reeve asked. Enhanced. Yamin replied, flex her fingers as if testing their responsiveness. But still myself. It's like gaining a new sense I didn't know I was missing. One by one, the crew underwent the modification process. Reeve was last. And as the enhancements integrated with his nervous system, he understood why the humans had been quarantined. The modifications weren't just about enhanced perception. They were about seeing the universe as the humans now saw it, not as separate objects in space, but as interconnected systems, all part of a vast living network. Welcome to our reality, General Reeve, Mara said, and now Reeve could see that they weren't just speaking. Patterns of light flowed around Mara, carrying layers of meaning beyond simple words. Shall we discuss the Void Eaters? The conference chamber was a living space, its walls displaying flowing patterns that seemed to represent data streams. Around the circular table sat beings that had once been human, but were now something far more complex. each had undergone different modifications, creating forms adapted for specific purposes. The entities you call Void Eaters began Designation Yun, whose entire body seemed composed of shifting geometric patterns, are not destroyers in the sense you understand. They are recyclers. Recyclers. Reeve asked his enhanced perception, allowing him to catch layers of meaning in the word that his original consciousness would have missed. They feed on entropy, explained Designation Kara, whose form flickered in and out of visible light. Reality becomes stagnant when systems remain unchanged for too long. The Void Eaters consume static spacetime and convert it into raw potential for new universal expansion. The implications were staggering. Are you saying they're natural? As natural as forest fires or ocean tides, Mara confirmed. The issue is that your coalition's approach to civilization creates exactly the kind of static ordered space that attracts their attention. Oh. Then how do we stop them? Reeve asked. The assembled beings exchanged what might have been glances, though with their modified forms, it was hard to be certain. You don't stop them, Designation Yon replied. You become something they cannot consume. And what would that entail? Change, Mara said simply. Constant, controlled evolution. The Void Eaters cannot process living systems that are in a state of active transformation. They're designed to break down crystallized patterns, not fluid ones. Commander Tal leaned forward. You're suggesting we abandon our way of life entirely. I'm suggesting you have a choice, Mara responded. Maintain your current static civilization and be consumed, or adapt and survive. What happened when you faced them? Reeve asked. The patterns on the walls shifted, showing what appeared to be historical data streams. They arrived in our system 300 years ago. We lost 12 colony worlds before we understood their nature. Then we began the Great Modification. Images flowed across the walls, humans undergoing radical transformations, merging with technology, with each other, with the very fabric of space around them. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. We became something they couldn't process. Designation Kara explained. Living systems in constant flux. Our cities grow and change by the hour. Our people adapt and modify themselves daily. We are evolution incarnate. And as a result, Jan added, the Void Eaters consider our space toxic to their function. They avoid us entirely now. Reeve felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on him. You're offering to help us become like you. We're offering to help you survive, Mara corrected. The specific form that survival takes is up to you. Over the next several days, the human modifications they witnessed defied every assumption the Coalition had about the nature of life itself. Humans who could exist in hard vacuum, their bodies adapted with redundant organ systems and atmospheric recycling capabilities. Beings who shared consciousness across vast distances, experiencing reality as a collective while maintaining individual perspective. Entities who treated physical form as merely one option among many. The key, Mara explained as they toured a facility that seemed to reshape itself as they walked through it, is controlled chaos. We maintain pattern integrity while allowing for constant variation. Like a river maintains its flow while every drop of water within it is always moving. But what about identity? Dr. Yamin asked. What about the essence of what makes you human? What made us human, Designation Kara replied, was our ability to adapt, to learn to survive against impossible odds. We've simply taken that capacity to its logical conclusion. They showed Reeve combat techniques that blended biology and technology in ways that seemed like magic. Humans who could reconfigure their bodies into defensive configurations. Others who could interface directly with machines, creating hybrid entities that were more than the sum of their parts. When the Void Eater's servants arrive, Mara explained during a demonstration, they expect static targets using predictable weapons. Instead, they face opponents who remake themselves mid-battle. Reeve watched in fascination and horror As human warriors literally tore parts of themselves away to use as weapons, their bodies immediately regenerating, while the detached portions exploded with devastating effect against simulated targets. The Coalition could never accept this, Tal said quietly. Our people aren't prepared for this level of change. Then perhaps, Mara suggested, it's time to start preparing them. The offer presented to Reeve was simple in concept, devastating in implication. The humans would provide Coalition forces with modification technology and tactical expertise to fight the Void Eaters. In exchange, the quarantine would be lifted, and humanity would be free to establish contact with other species to share their evolutionary philosophy throughout the galaxy. You want to spread your modifications to other worlds, Reeve said. We want to prevent galactic extinction, Mara replied. If species remain static, they will all eventually fall to the Void Eaters. Evolution is not optional in the cosmos we now inhabit. And if we refuse your help, then you will face extinction with honor intact. Designation, Yon said without irony. But you will still face extinction. The return journey to Coalition space gave Reeve time to wrestle with the impossible choice he carried. As the modifications wore off, he found himself missing the expanded perception, the sense of connection to something greater than himself. That perhaps scared him more than anything else. General, Chief Navigator Voss approached as they neared Coalition space. What are we going to tell the Council? Reeve stared out at the stars, seeing them now as the humans did not as distant points of light, but as nodes in a vast living network that spanned the galaxy. The truth, he said finally, that survival requires change, and change requires sacrifice. The emergency session of the Coalition Council was the largest gathering since the beginning of the Void Eater crisis. Representatives from all remaining worlds attended either in person or via quantum link, and the chamber buzzed with desperate hope and fearful anticipation. Reeve's report was met with stunned silence. The recordings and data from human space defied easy interpretation, even with the enhancement technology the humans had provided for review. You're suggesting we transform our entire civilization, Chancellor Morden said when he finished. I'm suggesting we adapt it, Reeve corrected. The humans have offered to work with us to help us develop our own approach to evolutionary flexibility. And the price? Asked Council Member Tyros. The end of the quarantine. Freedom for humanity to interact with other species again. And acceptance that our static approach to civilization makes us vulnerable to cosmic forces we've never had to consider before. The debate that followed was intense and often heated. Some council members saw the human offer as salvation. Others as a trap that would lead to the loss of everything that made Coalition culture valuable. It was Dr. Halen who finally asked the crucial question. General Reeve, in your professional military opinion, can we defeat the Void Eaters without human assistance? Reeve met her gaze steadily. No. Our current capabilities are insufficient. We need either to develop entirely new approaches to warfare and civilization, or we need help from those who already have. The vote was closer than it should have been, but desperation ultimately won out. The Council voted to accept the human offer with strict oversight and gradual implementation. 3 weeks later, the first human ships arrived in Coalition space. The vessels were unlike anything in Coalition databases, fluid organic-looking craft that seemed to reshape themselves as they moved. They were led by the same Mara Voss who had negotiated with Reeve, though their ship appeared to be as much a part of them as a vehicle they commanded. The initial human advisory team consisted of 12 individuals, each specialized in different aspects of what they called adaptive warfare. They were based on Forge Station, a massive Coalition military facility that would serve as the testing ground for new technologies and tactics. Commander Tal had remained deeply suspicious of the humans, but even he could not argue with their effectiveness. Within days of arrival, the human team had begun developing countermeasures specifically designed for Void Eater combat. The key. Mara explained to a gathering of coalition military leaders, is to make yourselves unpalatable to them. Void Eaters process static matter energy. If you're constantly changing, they can't establish a consumption lock. The first field test came sooner than anyone anticipated. A Void Eater incursion began in the Talos system, home to nearly 2 billion coalition citizens. The entity emerged in the outer system, and the familiar shimmer of reality distortion began spreading inward toward the inhabited worlds. Reeve commanded the response fleet personally, with a human advisory team led by Designation Corps, a being whose form appeared to be composed entirely of living armor that responded to their thoughts. Remember Corps. Communicated through the enhancement implants the Coalition crews had reluctantly accepted. You cannot fight them with static tactics. Every maneuver must be part of a larger, constantly evolving pattern. The battle that followed defied every rule of conventional warfare. Coalition ships enhanced with human biotechnology changed configuration mid-flight. Weapon systems that had seemed like standard energy cannons revealed themselves as adaptive technologies capable of altering their output parameters in response to enemy behavior. But it was the human approach to personal combat that truly shocked the Coalition forces. When Void Eater servants' strange semi-physical entities that preceded the main incursion boarded the Coalition ships, the human warriors met them with tactics that seemed like controlled insanity. Reeve watched in horrified fascination as human soldier designated Blade literally detached their own arms, implanted explosive charges in them, and hurled them at the invaders before regenerating new limbs from backup biological material. Another human designation? Shield absorbed a direct hit from a servant energy weapon, their body channeling the energy into their cellular structure and redirecting it as a focused blast that destroyed 3 enemies. They're using their own bodies as adaptive weapons. Dr. Yamin reported from the medical bay, her voice carrying a mixture of professional admiration and personal horror. But it worked. For the first time since the Void Eater crisis began, Coalition forces weren't just evacuating and retreating. They were fighting back effectively. The tide turned when Mara Voss themselves led a boarding party into the Void Eater manifestation itself. Reeve watched through sensor feeds as the human team entered what appeared to be solid shadow. Their bodies adapting in real time to survive in an environment that shouldn't have been able to support any form of life. What are they doing in there? Navigator Voss asked. Changing the rules, Corps replied. Void Eaters rely on consistent universal laws to process matter. If you introduce enough chaos into their consumption matrix, the Void Eater entity suddenly stopped its advance. For a moment, it seemed to convulse reality rippling around it in ways that hurt to perceive even through advanced sensors. Then it simply left. The entity folded in on itself and vanished, leaving behind only disrupted space and a system full of very confused Coalition personnel. Victory Corps announced, "Your citizens are safe." In the aftermath of the Talos battle, everything changed. Word of the Coalition's first successful defense against a Void Eater spread throughout the remaining worlds, bringing hope for the first time in months. But it also brought questions and resistance. The modifications required for effective anti-Void Eater warfare were extensive. Ships needed biological integration components that made them as much organism as machine. Crews required neural enhancements that allowed them to interface directly with these hybrid systems. Military personnel underwent physical modifications that enhanced their adaptability in combat. "We're becoming something we're not," Commander Tal said during a senior staff meeting. "Every modification, free adaptation, we're losing pieces of who we were." "But we're gaining the ability to survive," Reeve replied. "And isn't that what matters?" The philosophical divide that had always existed in Coalition space became a chasm. Some worlds embraced the modifications adapting their entire societies to become more fluid, more responsive to change. Others resisted viewing the human influence as a corruption of everything the Coalition stood for. It was on the world of Kepler Prime that the resistance movement found its voice. "We will not surrender our essential nature," declared Governor Riss during a public broadcast. "The humans may have saved us from the Void Eaters, but at what cost? Are we to abandon millennia of cultural evolution, of hard-won wisdom about the dangers of unchecked change?" The protests that followed were largely peaceful, but they represented a fundamental schism in coalition society. Some wanted to go back to the old ways to find a solution to the Void Eater crisis that didn't require such dramatic transformation. Others had seen the effectiveness of human methods and wanted to accelerate the adaptation process. Reeve found himself caught in the middle, no longer fully trusted by traditionalists who saw him as the architect of coalition transformation, nor fully accepted by those who believed the adaptations weren't going far enough. It was during this period of civil discord that the humans made an offer that would reshape the galaxy forever. "We propose a demonstration," Mara Voss announced during an emergency council session. "Allow us to show you what full integration with our adaptive philosophy could accomplish." "What kind of demonstration?" Chancellor Morden asked. "We will terraform and adapt an entire system in real time," Mara replied. "Transform it into something that not only resists Void Eater incursion, but attracts and converts their energy into something useful for galactic civilization." The demonstration took place in the Epsilon Gladius system, a collection of barren worlds that had been abandoned after their sun destabilized decades earlier. The human fleet that arrived for the project was unlike anything previously seen, ships that seemed more like seeds or spores than traditional spacecraft. What followed challenged every assumption about the nature of reality itself. The humans didn't terraform the worlds so much as transform them into something unprecedented. Under their influence, dead planets became living ecosystems, but not ecosystems as the Coalition understood them. These were worlds where the boundaries between biology and technology had completely dissolved. Cities grew like coral reefs, expanding and adapting in response to the needs of their inhabitants. Transportation systems resembled circulatory networks, moving people and resources through organic tubes that adjusted their routes in real time. The very atmosphere was a living system capable of self-regulation and adaptation to support multiple forms of life simultaneously. But it was what they did to the system's star that truly demonstrated the scope of human capabilities. The dying sun was surrounded by a network of structures that fed on its energy output, stabilizing its reactions while directing excess radiation into massive biological computers that spanned the space between planets. The entire system became, in essence, a single enormous organism dedicated to processing information and energy. "This is impossible," Dr. Halen whispered as they observed the demonstration from orbit. "They've created a living stellar system." "Not created," Mara corrected. "Awakened. Matter and energy were always potentially alive. We've simply provided the catalyst for that potential to be realized." The implications were staggering. If humanities could do this to an entire star system, what else was possible? What couldn't they transform, adapt, evolve? "And you're saying this kind of system would be immune to Void Eater attack?" Reeve asked. "More than immune designation," Jan replied. "Such a system would actually process Void Eater energy, converting it into additional complexity, rather than being consumed by it. The Void Eaters would find themselves nourishing the very thing they were trying to destroy." The demonstration had its intended effect. Council worlds that had been hesitant about human modifications began requesting them directly. The success of adaptive systems in resisting Void Eater incursions spoke louder than any philosophical argument. But it also intensified resistance from traditionalist factions. The crisis came to a head when Governor Riss of Kepler Prime announced his world secession from the Coalition. "We refuse to participate in the death of natural life," he declared. "The humans offer survival at the cost of our souls. We choose to face whatever comes with our essential nature intact." Within days, 12 other worlds joined Kepler Prime in forming what they called the Pure Coalition. a confederation of worlds committed to resisting human influence and finding alternative solutions to the Void Eater crisis. The situation deteriorated rapidly when a Void Eater incursion struck the Kepler system. Reeve led the Coalition response fleet, now equipped with full human biotech integration. But Kepler Prime refused to allow modified ships to approach their world, viewing them as a contamination as dangerous as the Void Eaters themselves. Governor Riss, this is General Reeve. He broadcast to the planet's surface as the Void Eater entity manifested in the system's outer reaches. We can help you. Our modified defense systems have successfully repelled Void Eater attacks. Please allow us to defend your world. General Reeve, Risses responded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. We will not permit abominations into our system. If we must die, we will die as ourselves, not as pale shadows of creatures that have forgotten what it means to be truly alive. What followed was as tragic as it was inevitable. Reeve's fleet fought valiantly to contain the Void Eater at the system's edge, but without being able to approach Kepler Prime directly, they couldn't establish the adaptive interference patterns needed to repel the entity. The Void Eater, attracted by the planet's static energy signature, moved inexorably inward. The final transmissions from Kepler Prime were both heartbreaking and stirring. This is Governor Riss, the message began. We are dying as we chose to live as ourselves. Let the galaxy remember that there were those who chose existence over mere survival. In the end, Kepler Prime and its 2 billion inhabitants simply ceased to exist, consumed by forces that their unmodified technology and static defensive postures couldn't begin to counter. The loss of Kepler Prime marked a turning point. The remaining holdout worlds of the Pure Coalition faced a stark reality: adapt or die. One by one, they began requesting human assistance, though many did so with deep reluctance and careful limitations on the extent of modifications they would accept. But the damage to Coalition unity was permanent. Even as the immediate threat of extinction receded, deep philosophical and cultural divisions remained. Some worlds had embraced human modifications so thoroughly that they barely resembled their original species. Others had adopted minimal changes, enough to survive, but not enough to truly thrive in the new galactic environment. Reeve himself had undergone significant modifications by this point, not by choice, but by necessity. Leading mixed species human fleets required neural interfaces that permanently altered his brain structure. Surviving in the modified environments of adapted ships required biological enhancements that changed his fundamental physiology. Standing in his quarters aboard the Sovereign's Dawn itself, now a hybrid of Coalition technology and human biotech, Reeve looked at his reflection and struggled to recognize the being staring back at him. His eyes now carried the telltale depth of neural enhancement. His skin showed the subtle patterns that indicated biological redundancy systems. When he moved, there was a fluidity that spoke of modified muscle and bone structure. "Are you still human?" he asked his reflection, though he knew the question was meaningless. Humanity itself had evolved beyond such categories. The question that mattered was survival worth the price? The final phase of the war against the Void Eaters came not through military victory, but through an even more profound transformation. The humans revealed the ultimate goal of their evolutionary philosophy, not just to resist the Void Eaters, but to transcend the conditions that made their existence necessary. The universe operates on cycles, Mara explained to the assembled leaders of the transformed coalition. Expansion, stagnation, consumption, renewal. We have the opportunity to break that cycle. What they proposed was radical beyond imagination: the active transformation of galactic space-time itself. Using the network of modified worlds and systems as focal points, humanity and their adapted coalition allies would reshape the fundamental laws of physics in their local area of the galaxy. We can create a pocket of reality where entropy works differently. Designation Core explained, where stagnation becomes impossible, not because it's prevented, but because it's no longer a valid state of existence. The project would require the cooperation of every modified world, every adapted species, every enhanced individual. It would mean abandoning any hope of returning to their original forms, of reclaiming the static certainty of their former existence. It would mean embracing the change as a fundamental aspect of reality itself. The vote was closer than anyone expected, but in the end, the promise of not just survival but active participation in the universe's evolution won out. The great work, as it came to be known, took place over the course of 5 years. Worlds became nodes in a vast network of living systems. Stars were transformed into biological computers, processing unimaginable amounts of information. The space between systems became filled with a form of matter that was simultaneously empty vacuum and teeming with adaptive life. The Void Eaters, when they encountered this transformed region of space, simply couldn't process it. Their fundamental programming required static matter and energy to consume. When faced with reality that was itself alive and constantly changing, they simply left. Not just from Coalition space, but from that entire spiral arm of the galaxy. The transformation was complete, but at a cost that some argued was too high to pay. Standing on the observation deck of New Earth, the transformed homeworld of humanity, General Kale Reeve watched star systems pulse with life across the cosmos. His reflection in the transparent biometal of the viewing wall showed a being that was recognizably still himself, but enhanced beyond the dreams of his original species. Beside him, Maravos had taken on a form that was almost nostalgically human, though the patterns of light that played across their skin spoke of capabilities that defied classification. "Do you regret the choices we've made?" Mara asked. Reeve considered the question. 40 billion souls had been saved. The Coalition, in its transformed state, was thriving beyond all previous imagining. Art, science, and culture were experiencing a renaissance as beings enhanced beyond their original limitations explored possibilities that had never before existed. But they were no longer what they had been. The Zalari, the Rigelians, the Centaurans, all had been changed so fundamentally that their original forms seemed like crude sketches of what they had become. "I think," Reeve said finally, "that regret is a luxury we can't afford. We made the choices necessary for survival. Everything else is just adaptation. And yet you mourn what was lost." "I mourn simplicity," Reeve admitted. "There was comfort in believing we were fixed things in a universe of constants. But that comfort was an illusion. The universe has always been changing. We just learned to change with it." In the distance, a new world was being born, not through geological processes, but through the conscious will of its intended inhabitants. A group of enhanced beings had decided to create a place where the arts could flourish in ways impossible under the old laws of physics. The world formed like a flower blooming in space-time, its reality shaping itself around the creative vision of its architects. "What happens now?" Reeve asked. "Now we explore what we've become," Mara replied. "The Void Eaters were just one challenge. The universe holds many more, but we're no longer limited by the boundaries of our original forms or the constraints of static reality. Will we spread beyond this region, transform the entire galaxy? Eventually, perhaps, but carefully, consensually. The old Coalition forced uniformity through law and treaty. We offer transformation through choice and demonstration." Reeve nodded, understanding. Some species would choose to remain in their original forms, accepting the risks that came with stagnation. Others would embrace change as thoroughly as humanity had. And many would find some middle path, adapting just enough to thrive in the new galactic environment. The diversity that resulted would be far greater than anything the old Coalition had achieved. As they watched a group of beings who had once been human but were now something like living stars passed by the observation deck, they communicated through gravitational pulses, their thoughts operating on timescales that spanned centuries. "Do you think they remember being human?" Reeve wondered aloud. They remember everything, Mara replied. Memory doesn't disappear with transformation. It just gains new context. And us. How long before we change into something unrecognizable? We're changing every moment, Mara said with what might have been a smile. The question isn't whether we'll remain recognizable, but whether we'll remain ourselves. Is there a difference? Perhaps that's what we'll spend eternity finding out. The stars continued to pulse with living light, and across the galaxy, beings that had once been bound by the limits of flesh and metal and stone explored possibilities that had no names in any original language. The Void Eaters had been defeated not through force of arms, but through becoming something they couldn't consume. In saving themselves from extinction, the Coalition and humanity had discovered something far more profound. The universe itself was alive, and consciousness was not limited to any particular form or scale. What they had become was strange, wonderful, and terrible in equal measure. But it was also undeniably alive, growing, changing, adapting to challenges that had not yet been imagined. The old universe, with its fixed laws and immutable constants, was ending. What was beginning was something far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more beautiful. Reeve's enhanced perception allowed him to feel the pulse of life that now ran through space itself. Every star, every planet, every being was connected in a web of consciousness that spanned light years. They were individuals, but they were also part of something vast and growing. No other choice, he murmured, echoing the words that had started this journey. No, Mara agreed. But perhaps choice was never the point. Perhaps it was always about becoming what we needed to be. In the end, the Coalition had turned to humanity, not because they were the most feared species in the galaxy, but because they were the one species that had learned to fear nothing. Not death, not change, not even the loss of their original nature. And in learning to embrace change as completely as humanity had, the Coalition had not just survived the Void Eaters. They had transcended them entirely. The future stretched ahead, infinite and mutable, full of possibilities that could only be explored by beings willing to change themselves to match whatever challenges lay hidden in the cosmic depths. They were no longer fully human, or fully Coalition, or fully anything that had existed before. They were something new, and they were alive.